Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Hail to the Raven Queen. Hail to the bloodied beak. Hail the Carian carrier. Hail the blessed one of battlefields. You who ranges over the ravaged. You who breaks the bow. You, oh you, who draws the sword, shatters the spear, who bloodies the ground. Oh you, who ranges widely, whose people come from countless nations, countless places. Dark-winged one, who brings the daring and the dying. You who bring the broken and the bleeding, you who gather and call. Hail to you, mighty Raven Queen, with your chorus of voices, with your countless children who fly through the skies, who land on pale corpses. Hail, O Raven Queen, hail, O black-cloaked one. May we honor you with words, may we honor you with care, and may we honor you with action. May your shadow fall upon us when it must, and may the work we do be worthy in your wake. Hail to you. Let's look. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 126 with my good friends and co-hosts Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. Unfortunately, our co-host Cabra was not able to make it tonight. They are going to be hopefully enjoying their evening out, and we will see them in the next episode. So how are you all doing tonight?
I'm doing decently well. How are you, Snow?
I'm good, thank you. I've been working on writing something about crafting questions for divination. So, sort of talking to people and getting thoughts on that, because it sort of occurred to me that that end of the equation's often overlooked, because everyone's going into the analysis and the readings and the answers and overlooking the initial question. It's sort of been interesting. It's like how we sort of talk about going back to the foundations of practice and things. And that is kind of the foundation of doing divination stuff. If you don't have an initial question, you don't have anything to kind of look for. So that's what I've been doing.
That's excellent. I've been reading for so long that I sometimes I get so used to having to help people formulate questions that it's like, oh, you could just, head this off of the past by writing an article about it. That would be sensible. I appreciate you doing that. What things have you been working on? What projects are you working on besides, I know that you've got the article you've been writing, but is there anything else that has been on your docket since?
I mean, that's mostly been it. Just kind of that and the day job and life generally, really, on this end.
I get it.
What about you two?
A lot of my energy and time has been spent bonding with my bear pelt and working with my berserker ancestors as they come through. When you make those steps in your path that like logically you kind of have an idea and then you take the step and then you're like, oh yeah. It's a little, I knew it was going to be big. Logically, I don't know if I realized how much stuff would start coming through. So that is where a lot of my energy and focus has been of late.
Okay, well, I've been doing pretty good. I'm back to working 3 overtime a week, whether I want to or not, because work is the way it is. Um, Aside from that, I have been diligently smashing on the books that I've been writing. I had some interesting divination the other day where it basically prompted me to open up my alpha to people who will probably be beta readers, because part of the thing that I'm running into in writing this basic work on heathen esotericism and spirit work is 95,000 words almost. And I'm in splitting this book in two, I need to perhaps sharpen the focus of each book. And so I'm kind of taking inventory and being pushed to see what people are reacting to in the book as it stands, which is not a comfortable thing for me because I'd rather have my inner editor take care of it before I hand it to somebody. But we are where we are, and I asked the question. So, aside from that, I have been plugging away at my blog. I just wrote a post on the spring equinox and my general non-celebration of holidays lately. Let's see what else. Of course, there's Three Pagans on Tap, which I just did a really probably one of our best episodes to date with Malik and Indy talking about modern animist pathways and actually developing our communities in ways that the spirits shape. So I'm really proud of the episode and really recommend folks check it out. Aside from that, I think that I just had or I'm having a YouTube video post automatically because I recorded it some time ago and mixed it down. So I've probably have to get my nose back to the grindstone of content, but irons in the fire and all that. And then of course doing this project here with AGF. So to that end, I'm just happy to be here. Is there anything that we wanted to cover before we got into the meat of tonight's episode? I had nothing else.
Okay. In that case, I'd like to introduce our guest. This is Morpheus Ravenna, gender fluid sorcerer, artist, writer, residing in the East Bay of California. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So, on top of the kind of brief sentence I just said, would you like to sort of introduce yourself to anyone not familiar with you or your work?
Sure. Yeah, so like you said, I'm an artist and writer and sorcerer. In terms of my spiritual practice, I'm a longtime devotee of the Morrigan. I'm part of the Coru Cathubodua Priesthood, which is dedicated to the Morrigan and the family of war goddesses that she's a part of. I make my living primarily as a tattoo artist, a ritual-focused tattoo artist, and that's something I'm pretty passionate about. But I also do art and illustration and have written a few books, working on a new one. So yeah, got my irons in a few fires.
That's really cool, and it's really varied
Yeah.
as well. So just kind of touching on that, since you sort of said that's kind of your main thing, how did, because looking at your website and social medias and kind of I've been aware of you and your work for a while now. How did you get into doing devotional tattooing?
Yeah, it's actually my second career. Um, it just hit me at a certain point. I sort of had a lightning bolt moment about it. I have been an artist all my life, but I was working in natural resource conservation and wildlife habitat, which is what I did my degree in sustainable agriculture and conservation. And so that was my first career, and I was working along. But I was frustrated with not having enough space in my life to focus on art. And so I wanted to move back into centering art. And I just noticed that I had been having all these conversations with people around me in spiritual communities that I'm part of, and this, I just kept hearing from people, I want to get a tattoo, but I want to find an artist who can support the ritual aspect of it, or who understands the spiritual nature of it for me, or can, help it be a magical process. I'd had that conversation a bunch of times, and then I just had like this lightning bolt moment, like, you're an artist and a ritualist. You could do that. And so I just, the idea caught hold of me, and I just sort of never looked back. Yeah, so I'm pretty passionate about it. I love my work. Not all of my clients are ritual tattoo clients. I have some, just people who are just coming for me to me as a tattoo artist. But the part that really nourishes me and really excites me is ritual tattooing.
That's really cool. And I know you post a lot of your stuff kind of online and photos and things, and it's
Yeah,
always sort of really sort of gorgeous artwork.
thank you.
Um, I was curious just on that point, what kind of is the ratio of kind of devotional tattoos to non-devotional tattoos?
I would say it varies, different times, or people come to me seasonally for important moments in their, ritual year or their sacred cycles. But overall, I would say somewhere between 25 and 50% of my work is ritual tattoo or sacred tattoo kind of clients.
Hmm. Oh, that's
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. There's not enough people doing what I do in the industry.
Mm.
So I sometimes get people asking, like, I can't come out to where you are for this tattoo. Can you recommend somebody in my area? And um, you know, I, I would love to see more artists bringing that side of the practice in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know I've personally had people sort of say around here, is there anyone doing anything like you do? And I've gone, well, unless you're going to fly out to California, no.
There are a few,
Mhm.
but yeah, not very many. And it's ironic when you look at the history of the practice, like in many historical societies that had tattooing practices, there's often a sacred aspect to it, very often. But like so many things that have been sort of stripped out of their spiritual aspects by, you know, colonialism and capitalism, um, the tattoo craft in the West, at least, has really been transformed in that way. And so I'm kind of making it my mission to inspire a movement back the other way.
That is excellent. Um, as far as around this area in the Michigan area, I know at least of one tattoo artist who tattooed my runes,
Mm,
and it was a 3 hour ritual that she allowed me to put on her space. Janet Nelson of Bright Idea Tattoo.
nice.
If you're in the Ypsilanti Arbor area, highly recommend her because she's amazing as an artist and just fabulous as a person, and allows you that space to do ritual. There are people, it's just, I lucked out. I was when I started my journey on finally fulfilling the promise of having them tattooed on my skin, I went, okay, uh, who's in the area? And happened to luck out.
Yeah, that's great. I may hit you up later for that artist's information because I want to be able to answer those questions when people ask me, like, oh, hey, I do know of someone in your area. So,
Absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the things I love about doing shows like this is we get to do that kind of networking both in front and behind the scenes. And it's really affirming when you find somebody who will give you that space and will allow for it. Because my Odin tattoo was done by somebody that I just happened to run into, and he wasn't all that interested. He just wanted to make his money, which is fine. But it's something really special when you're giving your body over to this living canvas to have somebody that actually gives a damn and knows what they're doing, ritually speaking. And I just, yeah.
yeah, I mean, a tattoo can be really profoundly transformative. Like you are altering your body in a permanent way that will, carry through with you for the rest of your life. And, that can be done lightheartedly. And I have some tattoos that weren't done that way. But, as deep as you're willing to go with it and have the ability to make space for that, it can be really profoundly transformative.
I think it's funny how we will sometimes say, well, this is tattooing, it's just skin deep. And I'm like, first off, no, it's not skin deep. The injection
Also,
speaks to that.
your skin is the primary, like that's the boundary between you and the world. So that is the point of connection. It's the point of contact. It's the point of exchange. That's actually really powerful. Like that phrase, like, oh, skin deep, it sort of implies that it's not deep. But that actually is like pretty powerful when you think about like, what you're placing in the skin. It can be an intentional portal. It modulates, how you relate to the world. That's very powerful. So yes, it's skin deep.
I'm curious if there's a difference in your process between when you do a ritual tattoo and a non-ritual tattoo, or what is involved in doing a ritual tattoo for you?
Yeah. It varies. So it doesn't look just one kind of way. It depends on, what the person's needs are and what kind of meanings are embedded in it, whether they have specific spiritual powers, God's spirits, ancestors that are, involved. So, sometimes it's as simple as inviting someone to like take a few breaths with me, do a little bit of alignment before we start, and maybe, vocalize their intentions or their meanings for this tattoo. Or, sometimes it's invoking a full, like, warded, consecrated space, going through cleansing and purification processes, doing prayers and offerings and invocations, and there can be like different layers for different people. A lot of it is about preparatory ritual, because when I'm tattooing, that's the ritual, that's the part of the ritual I'm doing. I need to be pretty focused on that. I need my hands and my attention to be fully dedicated to the tattooing. So a lot of times the ritual is about creating a space where that act has been made sacred, and is happening within a consecrated environment and in the presence of, different beings. It's also about creating a space in which the person who's being tattooed is able to be fully open to it as a transformative process. It might be about like having their sacred images visible to them while they're in the chair. It might be about what they're holding in their other hand, or whatever we're doing to kind of help them stay close to the presence of their holy powers, or whatever is important for them. Yeah, so it can look all kinds of ways. Sometimes spirits get involved and cause trouble. I've had spirits with opinions do things like repeatedly knock over the ink caplets until I figured out that they wanted a different color scheme than we had decided on. So, random stuff like that can happen, and if you're paying attention as a spirit worker, sometimes to recognize those kinds of things.
That's really cool. I was wondering then if you consider doing your tattoo work as part of your sorcery, or is it sort of separate to that? How do you?
I mean, I would say like tattooing can be sorcery and it can be made sorceress.
Mhm.
It's an art practice as well, so it sort of brings together those different aspects. It's a craft.
So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
When you're talking sorcery, what do you mean? Because I know in the common imagination, people think sorcery, they think D&D. So, and I'm not seeing any dragon wings sprouting out of your back just yet.
When I use the term sorcery, what I tend to be thinking of, I know that word means different things in different contexts, but to me, what I'm talking about is magical practices that are particularly rooted in spirit work and driven by relationships with spirits.
Neat. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So for you, sorcery must include spirits of some kind to be sorcery.
That's an interesting way to phrase that. Yeah. I would say I guess what I would say about that is that I feel like my magical practice would be very much impoverished if I tried to do it without the aid of spirits.
Yeah.
And I think like if you look at various kinds of magical practices, folk magics, systems of sorcery, there usually is a spirit aspect to it, whether that is kind of more in the background or more articulated. I guess, for me as an animist, I'm very animistic in my outlook and my understanding of the world, and I think that when I'm talking about spirits, I'm not just talking about like individual, discrete, like, dead people or named spirits. I'm also talking about this animistic idea and understanding of the world that everything is inspirited and alive. And so I don't really know how you do magic if you don't see the world that way on some level.
You're preaching to the choir on that one, because to me, heathen magic makes zero sense when you take the spirits out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's people that can make it work for them. So I don't want to take anything away from people who have found that you don't need spirits to do magic. But as a heathen who is a polytheist and an animist, I cannot,
Yeah.
I can't square that circle.
I mean, I think that there's a view of magic that it maybe is very colored by Western ceremonial kind of concepts, that magic is about creating change through an act of will. And I think if you're thinking about magic in that way, it might seem possible to do magic in this sort of, I don't know, sterile environment that is not full of spirits or driven or aided by spirits. But I just don't really understand magic that way. Like, I don't think of it as an act of will. I don't think of it as something that is about like imposing your will on the world. I think of it as something that is about being in relationship with everything around you, with the spirit world, and engaging and kind of mobilizing those relationships to create something together.
So, sorry, my brain is going a couple different directions at once, so I'm just going to try and pluck one thread, follow. When people say things like this, what I find some people will have as a reaction is, oh, so that means like you sit down and you sing Kumbaya with all these spirits and everybody gets along. And it's like, my experience is no.
There might be some negotiation involved.
Just a shit bit. And also, beyond negotiation, there's just some spirits that you don't want in your space and they won't listen to anything other than a hard no. And sometimes you got to have that backup with teeth. So I think it's a couple of people that I've run into have been like, well, how do you square that? And so I guess that's kind of my question to you is, if you're co-creating your magic with spirits and you come into a situation where they're, say, adversarial and you need this space cleared, as an example, what does that co-creative process look like? And does it only exist with certain spirits? Does it break down with others? Because to me,
yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
that's where the metal meets the meat a lot of times with a lot of these practices when we're talking sorcery, magic, satyr, spy, you name it.
Yeah, so when I talk about being in relationship with spirits, I don't mean that every spirit and every kind of otherworld being in the world is safe to interact with or has your best interests at heart. Like, I'm not
But the
trying to
water
paint a
horse wants to
picture
go
that like
galloping.
the spirit world is Disneyland. It's not.
But if I just grab onto the reins of the water horse, it'll take me to special places, right?
Okay, put a pin in that. I have stories. I guess, I kind of take an ecological view of the spirit world. And, maybe this is because I have a background in working in conservation, but I really think like, okay, for one thing, I don't think of the spirit world as separate from nature and the natural world and like the
Right.
world we live in. Like, it obeys similar ecological laws and cycles. And one of those things is that it's populated by all kinds of beings, like in the way that every ecological niche will find, some organism will find it. The same thing is true, I find, in the spirit world. And so there are predators, there are parasites, there is disease. There are toxins. Like, the spirit world is this very varied tapestry of different kinds of beings and different kinds of powers and teeming with life.
Well, shit. So they're not all just ascended masters waiting to help us evolve to the next stage, is what you're saying.
Right.
Well,
And
shit.
this is why, like, when I talk about sorcery, I'm always beginning with like, let's begin with boundaries and spiritual hygiene and basic protection practices, because you don't just like wander into the woods without any tools like that. That's not going to go well for you. Yeah, I think that like the more that you build those foundational practices, like boundary setting, spiritual hygiene, protection, having spirit alliances so that you have some beings that have your back. Those are those building blocks that allow you to be able to explore things, the more risky territory. like jumping in and swimming with water horses or, whatever.
You said Frozen, and my brain immediately went to that damn water horse, and I'm like, oh, look, Fae propaganda. But yeah, I mean, I generally speaking don't meet every person that is fresh and new to my community with no clothes on, because that's just not the done thing. But it's also like really not safe for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Weird. When you apply ecological principles to spirits, it's almost like things should make some kind of logic sense. So, when you recommend spirit alliances for your practice, I'm sure there's a couple of ways that generally speaking takes shape and comports with the sorcery you're trying to do, right?
Yeah, so, my practice is primarily rooted in like a Celtic polytheist worldview and spiritual system, I guess you could call it. But I think like there are some principles that are sort of good rules of thumb that probably apply in different traditions. And one of those things is like having, building alliances so that you kind of have a team or a cadre of spirits that will have your back and support you and help you and, watch, help you see what you might not otherwise see, all those things. And when people ask me like, how do you get started with that, because that it doesn't, you don't necessarily want to like build alliances with just any spirit that you happen along with, right? And so if you don't know where else to begin, I always say like think about who you do know you can trust, right? Whether it might be ancestors of yours that have your interests at heart, or gods that you're in relationship with that you can trust. If you are involved in a particular spiritual tradition, that tradition might have lineage spirits or spirits that are affiliated with it that you can trust, right? And so you go to gods or spirits that you can trust, and you say, help me find spirits that I can work with. Will you please guide me to or introduce me to the beings that I need to make my acquaintance with, that I need to seek out and make friendships with. And so that's like, you don't just have to like walk out into the woods naked and be like, does anyone want to like do things with me?
I understand that is a really excellent way to get to know the mosquito spirits very well.
They're like, you don't have to like start from ground zero. Like you have relationships, right? We all actually have some relationships that are available to us, whether or not we have gone anywhere with them. Another thing is ancestors of struggle, ancestors of practice. So like whatever it is we do in life, whatever your skills or your professions are, there may be ancestors of those things. People who in the past were part of those crafts or professions. Whatever your positionality is in the world, the struggles that you face, there are people that have faced those struggles before, and those are ancestors of solidarity and of struggle, and they might be available to have your back, right? The queer ancestors, if you're queer, like there's whatever sort of intersection of experiences you occupy, there are spirits related to that who are potentially there for you.
It was brought to my attention during a workshop with Ivo Dominguez Jr. that one of the spirits, or the groups of spirits, I should say, that I need to start working with are spirits of my particular union.
Hell yeah.
Which I'm kicking myself over because I'm like, why the fuck did I think of that? But
Think
sometimes
about all of the like
yeah,
strong like fighters that and everything that those people fought for in labor unions, you know, like yeah, that's
yeah,
how about that?
right. I mean, just when just thinking about the professions that you engage with, that I mean, you want to talk about lineage and tattoos. Holy crap.
Oh, I'm all up in this right now, actually. Because the book that I'm working on now is one that's going to be on ritual tattooing. And so
Ooh.
for part of that, I'm doing this deep dive of research on the history of tattooing, especially where it has been a sacred art, but just in general, the history of tattooing. And so I have been sort of finding the ancestors of the tattoo craft. And when you talk about that, like the first thing people think is like, you know, Ed Hardy or whatever, but that's like 20th century. I'm talking about like all the way back to the Paleolithic.
Right.
And
Right.
a lot of these ancient ancestors of the craft of tattooing, we don't know their names, but we can actually identify some of them. Like there are people who have been buried with tattoo tools in their graves. And to me, that's a tattoo artist ancestor. And so I'm starting to sort of develop a more particular, you know, not just the general idea of
Right.
tattooing ancestors, but these individuals, you know, this woman who was buried with a set of beautiful tools and amulets in pre-dynastic Egypt at the site of what would later be known as Hierakonpolis. There is a handful of graves in like from like the Bronze Age in what's now Russia. You know, they're like there are a bunch of these ancestors that have been found because of the tools that were in their graves.
It's kind of one of those interesting things because you see all the kind of, as you said, Paleolithic, the prehistoric stuff. And then after that, people just jump straight to Oceania and they think of the Maori and things like that with the
Yeah.
tattoos. And then from there, you get into kind of nautical sailor tattoos and things. So it's like in popular conceptions of tattooing history, there's just massive gaps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. We have a weird memory hole for it in the West. And you know, that has a lot to do with the extent to which we look to ancient Greece and Rome as our kind of like the overculture, you know, has this like cultural imaginary that is built on this ideology of being somehow the inheritance of Greece and Rome. And they were very, you know, they only used tattooing in a punitive way, right? And so for them, people that tattooed themselves decoratively or, you know, visibly, that was like the narrative is that is a marker of being a barbarian, right? That's how you would identify the difference between barbarian and civilized. We civilized people don't do that unless we do it to mark enslaved people or to mark soldiers as the property of the emperor or to mark criminalized people, you know. And so like we have inherited like this narrative, this idea of like tattoos and criminality and that, you know, good people don't do that. That's how far it goes back.
That makes
Yeah,
a lot
it's
of sense. Sorry,
that
go ahead.
whole, I was just thinking, it's that whole idea that you see in sort of academia that Western culture is sort of Greek social structures and sort of the Abrahamic religion. It's sort of that combination of Greco-Roman society and Christianity. And if the one is saying, well, tattooing is sort of defacing creation, and the other one is saying tattooing is punitive and a
Yes.
disgraceful act, you combine those together for a few
Yes.
millennia, and
Yeah. yeah, Christianity for sure is a big influence there. I would say I don't usually use a term like Abrahamic because
Right. Yeah.
that it's sort of yeah, I don't think you can lump Judaism and Christianity together in that way. But yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Or what?
Christianity
Yes.
and the church, particularly as a sort of geopolitical organization historically, has been really down on tattooing, and there have been Christian traditions of tattooing, but they're sort of weird and they're aberrations, I suppose, from what has been more the norm, that especially like like the Catholic Church and those sort of big church structures were very down on it. And it's because like it's one of those ethnocultural things that if you can strip that away from people, it's much easier to colonize them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you take away their sacred traditions, what are they left to grab onto?
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
I mean, I'm curious now because it looks like there are sort of parallels between your sort of tattoo research and then you're sort of looking into Celtic Gaelic lore and Gaulish stuff. So I'm wondering then, how much do you see it as reconstructing, revisiting, recreating what was versus innovating and producing new things that fit now? How do you sort of see that balance?
Yeah, I don't think of myself as a reconstructionist in terms of like, my spiritual identity. I don't use that term for myself. I'm very interested in history. And I am sort of voracious about wanting to learn as much as possible and sort of absorb all of that. And I think of it as like a well that I drink from. And then so that, when I have kind of internalized that understanding as much as I can of the past, that then informs and inspires the work that I'm doing now. But I don't see myself as trying to reconstruct or practice what people practiced in the past per se. Yeah, I would say I'm inspired by research. I have been experimenting a bit with actual tattooing technologies from the past, just like, I don't know, like sort of living history experimental archaeology kind of stuff. So like I got a friend of mine who's a metal worker to produce a replica iron tattoo needle based on the design that was used by, or was found in some Scythian tattoo kits from the Iron Age.
That's really cool.
And tattooed myself with that. And I also like manufactured a few bone needles and needles made out of hawthorn thorns and tattooed myself with those. Because I feel like there's something really appealing about connecting with those ancestral crafts and ancestral ways of making things. Not that I don't think it's somehow better because it's ancient. I'm still using also my machines.
Right.
But for me, it feels like a way of connecting to those ancestors and that lineage of practice. And so I like to have those connections and experience that.
It's sort of a very visceral way of connecting with those sort of ancestors of tattooing that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
did
no,
it
it's
kind of as part of my process of inviting them to guide me. So I'm going to try to make some tools in the way that you might have and connect with your experience.
that's really cool. So, I mean, just kind of given that you said you'd use them on yourself, just how does it compare to a sort of standard sort of setup?
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, for one thing, any kind of hand poked
Mhm.
tattoo experience is different from a machine. I wouldn't say it's more or less painful, but it feels very different. but it also helped me to kind of understand some things about why, just, so, to understand some things I had read about how those tattoos were being done. And yeah, I feel like there's something like, maybe the pace of it is slower, that kind of like hand poking process is slower, and I've had some ritual tattoo clients request that as well, because it feels like maybe more compatible with a ritual frame of mind for some people than the machine.
Yeah, I can see that sort of if it's slower and you've got that sense of sort of care and it's a deliberate act and you're really being forced to be in the moment to really pay attention to what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You've not just kind of, got the gun going and you autopilot shading or whatever.
Well, try never to be on autopilot when I'm tattooing anyway, but yes,
Yeah.
I see what you're getting at.
Yes, that's how you end up with solid black ones. You don't have to go get redone. Oh, yeah. Um, so just kind of glancing at your site a bit,
Yeah.
one thing that kind of pops up as sort of in passing a lot, I guess, rather than as one of the main features, is your involvement with the fairy tradition.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, we get all kinds of people on the show and we get all kinds of people in the community. So I was wondering if you could just maybe kind of give a brief kind of synopsis as to what that is for anyone who's maybe unfamiliar.
Yeah, so fairy tradition is a modern initiatory witchcraft tradition that was founded by Victor and Cora Anderson in the United States. It's kind of a unique tradition. It's distinctly different in a lot of ways from witchcraft practices that are sort of more built on the Wiccan model. It is fairly polytheistic. It is often described as ecstatic, and it's very queer. Like you don't have gender binary kind of myths or social structures in the fairy tradition. So yeah, it's I am an initiate, and it was where I had my early magical and ritual training. Quite young, actually. I got involved and connected with my first teacher when I was like 18 or 19, I want to say. And was initiated, I think I was 21.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was foundational to my practice. And initiation is one of those things that, like, you are always an initiate because that can't be undone.
Hmm.
The focus of my practice has shifted over the years to be more focused on devotional polytheism than on fairy tradition practice per se. But because it was so foundational to me, I definitely feel like there are aspects of that that are still part of my practice, that really still inform my way of being in the world.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because
actually, my relationship with the Morrigan, who has come to be really central in my practice, began in that coven that initiated me. Because even though, like, that coven is a, fairy witchcraft coven, it is, not Celtic polytheist in a devotional sense broadly in the way that my practice is now. That coven did and does have a very strong relationship with the Morrigan, and had a practice of working with her in an intensive way seasonally. And so through those ritual experiences in that coven, I had my first encounters with the Morrigan, and that relationship just kind of blossomed and became really important in my life, and eventually sort of took over. Yeah, so sort of after doing my part for the tradition, so that my lineage wouldn't end with me, I did some teaching and initiated a couple of students, and then sort of said, okay, now you can have me, and shifted my focus to a more Celtic polytheist devotional frame. Like witchcraft is still part of my life and my practice, but my spirituality is very centered on my relationship with the Morrigan.
So she's been there for a while then. That's yeah.
I'm gonna be 48 in a few days.
Happy
So
birthday.
thank you. That means she's been with me for well over half my life, like 2/3 of my life, I guess. I don't know, I'm not mathing right, but she's been with me for a long time.
Yeah, no, that's something.
Yeah.
So I suppose how do you get from that to starting up the Coru Cathubodua?
Well, he gave me some marching orders, like she does.
Yeah.
She actually, there was a time, this was in like 2011, 2012. She was coming to a lot of people, and she came to a few people in my immediate community with a really similar message, like build me a priesthood. And so a handful of us that had gotten that message sort of found each other and started building the thing. And that's 12 years ago. It's the shape of it has shifted and grown over time. But yeah, that was something that she asked for.
That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, so I guess from that, what does it mean to go from being more of a devotional group to being a priesthood? How do you?
Yeah, I guess, the reason that we chose that term priesthood is that our focus was and is service and being of service to the community around us. So not just having a practice together as a group of individuals, but hoping that that practice feeds an ability to be of service to a wider community. And so that has been our focus a lot. Sometimes that has looked like, putting on gatherings and big rituals, and sometimes it has looked like, volunteering or showing up in the street when there's justice focused, protests or street action happening. Sometimes it's more private things, like we have a pastoral counseling service where people can reach out if they want to talk to a priest. So yeah, we use that word priesthood because of having kind of that service focus.
That makes sense. And then it's reinforcing that idea that it's all about relationships then as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it's sort of yourselves and Morrigan as well as to each other. And then
Mm-hmm.
yeah. No, I like that.
Yeah.
Everyone is deeply thoughtful, reflecting upon this.
I have kind of a random aside question. As someone who works with and for the Morrigan and does devotional tattooing, and you're looked into the ancestry of tattooing, have you been asked, or do you know of anybody who has been asked by the Morrigan or by other gods or spirits to do any kind of recompense for the people that were tattooed in cultures where it was a form of a mark of slavery or a mark of like a more negative mark? Does that make
That's
sense?
interesting. Yeah, that hasn't come up for me. But I can see that it could. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess, tangential to that, what I do see is that people have different ways of kind of reclaiming a more positive relationship to tattooing.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of the things that sometimes comes up is Jewish clients. Like many Jewish people have a complicated relationship with tattooing, in part because of what I understand to be kind of an ancient, prohibition or sense that it wasn't, not recommended, but also because of modern history with what was done to Jewish people in camps with forcible tattooing. And so, for some Jewish people, it's like, we are not doing that. It's a desecration.
Mm-hmm.
But for other Jewish people, sometimes that is something they want to reclaim and make into a positive. And so when those people do choose to come to me for a tattoo, I have the opportunity to help them kind of transform what has potentially a really painful history, and make it into something sacred for them. And yeah, so Jewish people are just one example of, like, there can be clients where, like, there might be a family history or an ethnic history or a cultural history with tattooing that has that painful element, or where it has been, used against them or whatever. And if it's right for them to reclaim it, then that's something I can help them do. I also have kind of a standing thing where, like, if people have hate tattoos and they want to
Mm-hmm.
cover them because they are transforming that and choosing to distance themselves from that, I will help them with that. Like, I do that for free.
That's awesome. I know that's a big thing that a number of people realize that they want to shift. So that is awesome that you offer that.
I mean, that seems very sort of in line with the Morrígna, to transform from pain, find that sort of joy and healing and beauty through that.
Yeah. Another thing that comes up sometimes with tattoos is tattooing over scars, where, a scar is a record of something in the body, right? And so it can also, in the same way that a tattoo can be a site of memory, a scar is, a site of memory, and it holds a record of something that happened to you or that you may have done to yourself. And sometimes people want those scars tattooed. They might want to cover them, or they just might want to build a tattoo around them, and it can be a way of kind of choosing to shift your story or to shift your relationship to your story and what has happened to you, and that can be really transformative.
Find it really I'm just sitting here and I'm contemplating it and just kind of feeling my feelings as talking about, the relationship we have to our scars, the relationship we have to literally using ink to get rid of mistakes from our past or to transform them in new ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when you're talking about allying with spirits and sorcery, I don't know if you folks as Celtic polytheists have a multi-part soul,
Mm-hmm.
but
We do.
okay, cool. Because I'm just thinking of how we relate to the body as one of the souls.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of the camp that treats each soul as its own being with a capital B, and how transformative that is for that soul to take on that ink, to take on the literal scarification of the body so the ink has somewhere to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it can be a really profound act of like self-ownership,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to say like, this is mine and I'm going to modify it. And, you know, that's not unique to tattooing. Body modification, you know, gender transformative practices, transition related practices, gender confirming practices. Those are sort of, they all fall into this broad idea of like owning your body fully and saying, this is mine. I get to shape it. You know, it can be really empowering, I feel like.
Absolutely. And for me, wearing the runes on my skin as I have has been a very multi-layered, powerful process that has opened up so many conversations that I otherwise wouldn't have had, that has allowed me to, in some cases, be an advocate. I work in a maximum security mental health facility, and one
Oh,
of the
wow.
things that it's allowed me to do is talk to patients on the level and be like, yeah, I'm somebody you can talk with about your religious choices, and if you need resources, I will talk to the chaplain for you. And just, I don't know, just for me, the aspect of really not, unless I wear a long sleeve shirt, these are always out. And generally speaking, I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt because it's just too damn hot otherwise. Um, for me, this is a living embodiment of my practice of literally living these out in public, especially because we're talking about situations where a lot of these symbols are being hijacked for hate. And I think to a certain degree, you know, the display of your body, whether or not you want to make a political statement, is a political statement at some point. And I love that you're combining what I see as a very political thing of living your body, living it out loud, modifying this body the way you want to modify it, and enabling people to do that and have this very animist relationship to it and have this very magical practice entwined with it. I love how all these things gel together.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The body is political, and some bodies are more politicized than others.
Mm-hmm.
And I also feel like, you know, that experience of like tattoos that are visible versus tattoos that are in places you can choose to cover. You know, there's a lot of spiritual territory there too, like in the same way that, you know, people may have veiling practices or various kinds of practices where they, you know, it's about choosing what you do or don't show to the world, that can, and it can be tied into your spirituality or your religious practices, and tattoos can fold into that. You know, you are taking on a mark that's permanent, but you might still have some agency about when and how you show it or don't show it. And sometimes you know, the powers that a tattoo is dedicated for or connected to might have directives around that. And it's one of those things that, like, just, you know, carrying that on your body makes it so you need to be kind of conscious about the choices that you're making of displaying or not displaying.
And thinking about that, I suppose that's one of the more sort of obvious ways of bringing what you're getting from your devotion to Morrigan into your life. Because one thing that you see of a lot is sort of the term goddess of sovereignty, and sort of taking that ownership of your own physical form, what you do with it, what it represents to you, what it might symbolize to others, depending on what you do to it, with it. It can be, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, sovereignty is such a complicated concept. I feel like there's like so much to unpack there, right? Um, and I do feel like the Morrigan has a very strong relationship to sovereignty. I sometimes hesitate to call her a goddess of sovereignty per se, because when I think of like a goddess of sovereignty, I think of like Eru, or one of these, goddesses that is identified with the land as a territorial entity, and with, conferring power, and that in itself is a whole, mythic and political territory. But what I would say, like, from a mythic standpoint, I feel like the Morrigan's role is more related to protection and contestation of sovereignty. So like when it is contested or needs to be contested because the power is in unjust hands, that's when she comes in. But I also want to say that, like, all of that is kind of speaking of the mythic world she comes from, right? And the history, the cultural history of like Ireland and its myths and history. And we sort of live in a different relationship to sovereignty. I feel like, like it can be sort of complicated to bring that mythic world forward, because it's all this stuff about sacred kingship. And yet, like, at least for myself, like, I don't want a king. Right? Like, democracy is probably better, and actually I have really strong like anarchistic leanings, so I think that the concept of sovereignty is really fraught for a lot of contemporary practitioners, and that's good. Like, I want us to be thinking deeply about it. And so I feel like a lot of people, where they find a more comfortable place with that mythic universe, is focusing more on personal sovereignty rather than collective and political sovereignty. And that makes sense to me, but I also don't think you can fully separate them.
I was going to say, yeah. How do you square that circle without the contestation between the personal and the communal?
Yeah, and also the strictly focusing on personal sovereignty can also lead you down some dark paths, right? Because then you can get into all this, like, you're not the boss of me, sovereign citizen, weirdo, like, obsessed with personal freedom to everyone else's detriment kind of bullshit. Sorry, do we have language? Like,
no, we're an explicit podcast. Curse to your heart's content.
Yeah. So, too simplistic an idea of personal sovereignty taken to too far of a conclusion can really lead you astray also.
So it sounds to me like she balances a lot of the individual and communal responsibility around sovereignty as well, yes?
I think so, yeah. Like, the way that I like to think about sovereignty is it is about responsibility to the power, the source of the power that you wield and that you have access to, which brings with it a responsibility to be aware of your positionality, social, politically, like what powers and privileges do you have and where do you sit with respect to other people? What do you have given to you, and what is your responsibility that comes with that? What do we owe each other? All these, like,
I'm laughing,
right?
because
it's highly political stuff.
People like to divorce the spiritual from the political, and I'm like, no. If anything, it adds layers.
Do not try to do that.
Because, I don't idly take the name Othinson as my last name. There's implications in this world and others. And when you take on a god's name, or when you take on names, period, there's a political component, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because what is political means concerned with the flow and movement and distribution of power.
Right. Right.
And so,
And
I
my
would
gods,
say
if we
all religion is political in that respect as well.
right. And you could probably arguably find no less interested parties than on Morrigan and Odin for gods
Yes,
that are wrapped up in this notion of politics, sovereignty, and power.
absolutely. And this is why I see so many Morrigan people get pulled towards social justice work, and there's an aspect of trauma and survivorship and all these kinds of things. Yeah.
So in that respect, what I'm hearing underneath all of this is it's not enough to just say I'm a sovereign person. This is how I'm laying down my boundaries, defending my territory or our territory, as the case may be. A lot of this is grokking with where I'm coming out of with a lot of heathen folks. And with all due respect to relationship, this is also why I do not serve her, because trying to serve her and Odin in this regard is a tall fucking order. I don't know how people who have alliances with both of them do it.
No, but you know about the horse trading, right?
Uh, yeah, yeah, which is why I took that big fucking step back when invited into her priesthood.
For listeners, what I'm referring to is like a lot of people I know in the community of Morrigan devotees have had experiences where the Morrigan sends them to Odin to work with him, and vice versa. We have people that Odin sends to us, and I always have this mental picture of the two of them. Like at some point I need to do a painting of this, but I have long had this mental picture of Odin and the Morrigan like hanging out in the back room of some like smoky mead hall, conspiring together, playing chess with a chessboard that is, made up of the world.
I absolutely dig it. It sounds so familiar to my experience of these two, especially if they ever get in cahoots together.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're done.
Yeah.
I've had so many Morrigan people come my way, whether it's been for readings or for guidance on this, that, or the other. Well, the Morrigan stopped me one day and said, "You got to go learn this thing from Odin," and I'm go, "Seems right."
Yeah, we see that a lot. Like to the point where it's a running joke.
Yeah, there's so much cross training, there's so much I don't know, wheeling and dealing, I guess is probably the way to put it at this point. Because like you were talking about horse trading earlier.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I mean, that's sort of like a double entendre joke when you talk about like, because some people refer to a person who, carries a deity or oracular possession as horsing them or being the horse. So horse trading. But I'm
oh, it's funny because it's fucking true.
Yeah. Yeah, I see them both as deities that have this sort of like very long range view. And that, I mean, this might come out sounding kind of bad, but like they have a very instrumental view of people and especially their devotees.
Yep.
Which is not to say that they don't care about us or value us as people, but they are very aware of, in what way can I use this person on my chessboard of the world. Yeah, that has been my experience with the Morrigan, and it shows up in the literature about her, the myths. She has a multi-generational view of political events. you sort of see her moving things into position for a conflict to a latent conflict to be brought to the surface and fought out so that some sort of new equilibrium can happen.
I do find it interesting that like boundaries are such an important part of sovereignty, but people forget that being a good neighbor is part of the boundary process. But I do love the idea of Morgan and Odin in the back room, because I definitely get that vibe as well.
Yeah, and boundaries are so important, right? Like, and they're not just about like, this is what's mine and that's what's yours. It's what connects us and what allows us to communicate with each other in a healthful way, right? Like, yeah. I think that sovereignty is really all about understanding our position relative to the collective we exist inside of, and understanding what feeds us and you know, what are we responsible to.
I was thinking, with something you said earlier, it's interesting as well how both Morrigan and Odin kind of, a lot of their devotees have some interesting negative stereotypes about them. It's sort of what you were saying earlier about.
Snow, what the fuck are you talking about? We have no negative stereotypes at all. We are wonderful, happy, squishy people.
Of course. I have never encountered anyone saying I will kill a wolf with my bare hands for Odin.
All right, look.
Yeah. There are some people out there.
I mean, I will say, like, I would not trade my life experience of being dedicated to the Morrigan for anything, but she also kind of will ride you hard.
Yep.
And you know, spiritual burnout is definitely a thing that can happen. I have been having some experience with that myself, that like, you know, sometimes you do have to be able to say to your gods, I need to take care of myself a bit. And, you know, I don't know, this is probably not the same experience that everyone has with all different kinds of gods, but it's been my observation with the Morrigan for sure that like, she won't necessarily be aware of our needs and vulnerabilities, and we have to advocate for ourselves. And it's not that she doesn't care, it's that she is very not human and might not be aware that if you keep pushing yourself as hard as she is, you know, willing to engage with you, that might be bad for you.
I have experienced this with the old man, where
yeah,
maybe you've had this with the Morrigan, where Othin has ridden my ass so hard to make me get the understanding, because I was matching energy for a while there. Look, you dumb shit, you are still human. Whatever else you might be, you're still human, and you have to take a break every now and again. And he would shove and push and shove and push until I had to take a break or I was going to break.
yeah.
It sounds like we've had similar enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that like she doesn't necessarily have an awareness of what our limitations are.
Yeah.
And so that's the part where we have to step up and advocate for ourselves. And in my experience, she respects people expressing their limitations and setting their own boundaries. She tends to respect that. But it's not going to happen if you don't advocate for yourself.
So, go ahead, Snow.
No, it's all right. Go on.
I wanted to kind of pick up on that. Like, what does advocating for yourself look like when you're in a relationship with a god?
Well, negotiation, stating what your needs are. This, you know, it comes up a lot with the Morrigan, because I get emails from people and the Priesthood gets emails from people that are like, I've developed a devotional relationship with the Morrigan, and she's amazing, and I just want to pledge a complete oath to her and promise my entire life for all eternity. You know, like people sort of fall in love with gods, right? Especially early in a devotional relationship where it's sort of really starting to unfold and you're starting to feel really close to them. And, you know, gods can have a very overwhelming and magnetic and, you know, by nature mythic presence that just sort of absorbs you, right? And I see this a lot, that like sort of people in that first flush of devotion kind of fall in love in a way. And there's like a period of great risk where people might feel so moved by the sense of closeness with their deity that the thing that they suddenly want to do is take very profound oaths that might be quite consequential, that might, you know, affect the rest of your life or possibly future lives. And so I often find myself responding to messages from people being like, okay, this is a good time to slow down. Think about like what you might want to ask for, what limits you might want to set. You might not feel like you need them right now, but you do. And so actually just like being very upfront with gods about like, these are the boundaries I need to set for myself. This aspect of my life is not available to you, or, you know, these people in my family need to be protected or kept out of whatever trouble my work with you might bring into my life. You know, that can take all kinds of different forms, but it's just about like being willing to advocate for yourself and say, these are my needs. And if I am going to make promises, you know, make service commitments, then what I need from you, like it's just reciprocity, right? It's just availing ourselves of reciprocity and setting the terms. But you know, this can feel off-putting to people because it feels like making it transactional. But it's a very healthy thing to do.
I mean, you're talking about people who are like literally willing to sign their entire damn lives over to the gods. Great. And how are you going to eat in the meantime?
Yeah. And you know, like you can call it transactional, but you can also just say that's reciprocity, right? And it's just being specific about the reciprocity and asking for what you need.
Right. And I honestly, like, as somebody who is in several transactional relationships with regards to different spirits, transactional doesn't mean bad and it doesn't mean exploitative. It can,
Right.
but then again, a gifting relationship can be very exploitative.
Mm-hmm.
There's
we have like a negative association to it because of capitalism.
Right.
But transactional devotion is very traditional in polytheism, like in the ancient world. Like all of these, you know, votive dedications are like, I promise I'm going to put up a fancy altar for you, or I'm going to build this temple, but only if you help me win this battle, or, you know, help me do the thing.
Right.
Then I will do, you know, it's very traditional.
I feel very much like we need to lean into it, not just because it's a very useful way of relating to people, but in many ways it's much cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have a very clear idea of these are the expectations, this is what I do, this is when I do it, it's not this wishy-washy, I woke up at 3 a.m., oh shit, I have work to do. Because I've had this dream and now it's go time and I have work at 7 in the morning.
Yeah.
If this sounds like experience, that's because it is. And I have learned since then that negotiating is a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
But I prefer other people not have to do that.
The idea that you shouldn't ask for things or that you shouldn't negotiate or set terms with the gods, that to me feels very Protestant.
It's exceptionally Protestant because
You know, it's like,
literally
oh
devaluing your
Lord, you
work.
are so great, and I, who am so small, would never presume to ask you for anything. All I want to do is, you know, I will only worship and hope that you don't smite me. Like, that feels very Christian to me.
Just a shit bit. Yeah,
I
same.
think that, you know, gods in a polytheistic context are very open, or are they understand reciprocity.
I mean, again, that sort of as you were talking there, I was sort of thinking that that sounds like another journey on Morrigan takes people on. You get that frenzy, you have that kind of you're drawn into it, everything's right up at maximum, you're charging ahead, everything's chaotic, frenzied, but then having the care and the wisdom and the scale to then take charge and have that personal sovereignty and stand your ground and draw those lines and strategize a little. That's
Yeah.
very Anne Morrigan.
You know, there's a story from the Irish mythological cycle. It's sort of like the, you know, foundation myths of the Irish gods. And so the Tuatha Dé Danann and the god people, basically the gods of Ireland, they are in this big battle with the Favre. I think it was the Favre. There's two different cycles. There's one where they're fighting the Firbolg, and then there's one where they're fighting the Favre. And I think it's the Favre. They're sort of like these otherworldly beings that they are kind of rivaling with for the sovereignty of the land. Anyway, the point of this story is they're evenly matched, and so they go and they fight, and at the end of each battle, all their weapons are broken, and their edges of their swords are dulled. And the thing that enables them to prevail is having smiths and craftsmen among them who can repair their weapons and put new edges on them. And I always found that to be very powerful. Like, that is actually what, it's not the battle frenzy, it's not being better at violence, it's having the ability to repair and to take care of your tools is what actually will help you to prevail. That feels so important to me, and it's like one of those needful reminders, I think, for people who are you know, have dedications or are in relationship with intense war gods like the Morrigan or probably Odin. That, you know, it's not just about throwing yourself into the fray, it's about remembering to repair and restore, and you know, that
It's
is
not a contest
necessary.
to see how many spears you can throw yourself on, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that'll
That shit's
also connect.
important.
That also sounds like it sort of connects to your conservation background.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it is that sowing seeds, it is that regrowth, that repairing,
Mm-hmm.
sort of, you know, what happens after the battle and what happens when the war is over and you're looking out across the debris.
Mm-hmm.
You got to, you know, plant new seeds, fix what's fixable, replace what isn't.
I find it intensely interesting, and I'm really vibing with this conversation as an Odin's person, because the way that you're couching this, and maybe I'm just picking up on this a certain way because of my background, but it's almost like you can't be as effective a tool if you're a blunt sword, right? So
Yes.
you got to sharpen yourself. You can't
Yes.
be as effective if you're bent or broken.
Yes.
We got to keep you whole because you got to do this reparative work, not because the Morrigan is necessarily a goddess of healing, but she keeps the tools sharp.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so, like, for me, it has been a useful framework for remembering to do self-care practices, and that is not taking away from what you're giving to your gods. It is supporting what you're giving to your gods. And it also is helpful language when you have to try to explain to your gods what you need. Right? Like she understands she understands maintaining her tools and her weapons.
Yep. Yeah,
So you can explain it in those terms, and it's like, yes.
I vibe with that so
yes,
hard.
I agree.
Yeah.
Keep yourself sharp.
I also kind of I'm picking up a lot of this is also where a lot of the conservation work that you were mentioning earlier and the sorcery work and just so much of the metal meets the meat where with a lot of our gods, not just Odin and Morgan, but where we are a living expression as opposed to, okay, I am a spiritual person and I am just doing spiritual things in this box over here.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the more that your life becomes an expression of the sacred, the more places that this magic has opportunity to take root. I guess I'm trying to find the words is sometimes hard. But
no, I think that to the extent that you can sort of carry it with you in everyday life and interweave it into everyday life, like it becomes more potent.
Yeah, I really appreciate how in your life and in well, what of your life you share with us and put online, it's always worth remembering that that's never the entirety of anyone's life. But sort of that and of your work and such, that you are really demonstrating that it isn't just something left at your shrine or your altar, and that really is carried with you into everything that you do.
Yeah, I think that's possible for all of us on some level. Like I have a friend who she's dedicated to the Morrigan, and most of her practice is in daily life and work. She's not somebody that does a lot of formal ritual, but she does search and rescue, and she does a lot of volunteer work, and martial arts, and those are the things that her devotion finds expression through those things. And I think it doesn't always have to look like sitting in front of an altar, right? It can be expressed in a lot of ways.
I appreciate your perspective that you have to express your needs to the Morrigan because she doesn't always know them. She isn't always aware of them. I do think I agree with Sarah that sometimes the gods push us in order for us to learn how to stand our ground. But I like to think that sometimes it is just a missed communication and they're not aware. And I think, especially in the West, with the Christian perspective of God knows all, God knows everything, and putting all of our power into the hands of deity and not taking any of that responsibility on ourselves. I appreciate the perspective of communication is good even with deity because sometimes it's needed.
Yeah, I don't think that they are omniscient in the way that a Christian idea of God is usually constructed, and I do think that we have to tell them what we need.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's complicated, right? It's nuanced. Like there are ways in which they, like a friend will sometimes see what you need when you can't see it. There are things that they see that we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely true of the gods, but there are also going to be ways in which, because they do not live in an embodied form and they aren't human, particularly when it comes to frailty and physical limitation and those kinds of things, I think we have to be able to communicate about that. Oh, there was something else I was going to add that is escaping me.
I know this feeling.
Oh, just about like that sort of blurry line between are the gods pushing me against my boundaries because this is an opportunity for growth that they see for me, or is this going to cause me harm because they actually don't know what my limits are, right? That's a very tricky, blurry line. And I think, it has to do with the difference between discomfort and trauma, or discomfort and harm. And it's about like being able to look and recognize whether pushing yourself on something is going to lead to growth, or is going to lead to greater capacity because you pushed yourself here, or whether pushing yourself here is going to lead to harm. And a lot of it has to do with having agency about when to set that boundary, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you made that point, Emily. That is a very good point. And I do agree. There have been times where it's been a little blurry. Is Odin pushing me, or am I pushing myself? Am I not respecting my own boundaries? And Odin is like, all right, you gave me the go ahead. Yeah, that fully agreed. Just wanted to voice that because it is sometimes really, your own perception of what should be can get in the way, your own bias of how you view yourself, or who you are in that relationship at that moment versus 5 or 10 minutes down the road. When I started this project, I felt like I could take on the world, and I have figured out very quickly that is not the case. um it's one of the things that I'm encountering with getting this damn book finished, is that I'm having taken some time off where I'm not plugging away at like 500 words a night. Oh, rest, that's a thing. Shit. So yeah, sometimes it's a learning curve on both sides of the aisle, and you're both learning together where your limitations are as you're learning them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess in that regard, are there misconceptions that exist around the Morrigan in terms of who and what they are?
Oh boy, howdy. I mean, maybe less so than there used to be, at least in the communities that I'm running in. I feel like the last bunch of years there have been, more good, solidly written books about her than there used to be when I was kind of first around communities of devotion. But there are some sort of like persistent, what I would call misunderstandings that I still see. um One of them is, well, one of the big ones is the triple goddess thing. I don't know if that's too basic to cover here, but
Oh, hell no. Honestly, like
it
we
does
don't.
come up again and again, and I personally it drives me up a wall.
Go, 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 go,
Please do.
go, go.
Yeah, well, so like, all of the like 90s era GeoCities type websites about the Morrigan, they all are like, she's the triple goddess and maiden mother crone, and I just want to put my head through a wall with that one, because like the triple thing is real, the triadic thing, like, and that's just a pattern that shows itself throughout a lot of different Celtic, cultural frameworks. It's a way of saying like totality, right? Because the world is triune. There's like the three realms that make up the cosmology, and so everything is expressed in threes. And sometimes some gods are in groups of three, triads or sisterhoods or whatever. That is not the same thing at all as the maiden mother crone archetype deal. which, you know, arguably does have ancient roots. Like there's a theory that it maybe originated with like some Greek goddesses, which is fine, whatever. But the sort of contemporary iteration of this maiden mother crone thing feels very rooted in defining female life cycles by reproductive biology. So to me, it really feels projected onto the Morrigan. And, you know, if you look at her stories, the Irish literature that she comes from, you really cannot map this idea of maiden mother crone onto her very neatly. Like where she shows up in a triadic form, it's the Morrigan and her two sisters, which are usually Bive and Maka. And they're all war goddesses. They share some things, some common attributes, and then they also are distinct in different ways, but none of them is a maiden strictly or a mother or a crone only. Like they're all sort of shape-shifty and you know, Maka has a relationship with pregnancy, but it's in the context of a teaching tale about justice. And, you know, she's pregnant, but she's also like casting curses on all the men around her. And, you know, the Morrigan shows up in a hag form sometimes, but also so does Bive. And it's a particular guise she's putting on for a reason. So yeah, like basically it just doesn't work if you're looking at it in any kind of depth. And so yeah, I really don't like to refer to her as a triple goddess, because even though she is in a strictly literal sense, when you say that, people think you're talking about maiden, mother, and crone, and that just doesn't really work.
I guess just sort of thinking to sort of quick fire through a few more. So you have to offer blood to the Morrigan.
Oh, sweet Lord. Do people think that?
Oh, I've
I've
heard
come
that one a
across it.
lot. Yeah.
Okay.
I've actually
Well,
I've had encounters where I had to talk somebody down from offering a whole shitload of blood.
well, what I will say is that she will accept that and probably like it a lot as an offering. However, that is a way of really forging a very personal and lasting bond that you might have trouble changing the nature of later.
Oh, so not for a hello. Understood.
Yes. So, you know, it's certainly a valid kind of devotion, but no one should feel pushed or forced or expected to do that until they've really, really thought through the consequences. That is like, it's equivalent to taking an oath in my experience. Like, you know, if she's been given your blood, she is going to believe that you belong to her. That's my observation.
Every time you see a crow, it's the Morrigan.
Do you know how many crows there are? Like, why are crows so common? It's actually because they are incredibly clever and incredibly adaptable, and they're one of the few species of wildlife that truly thrives in anthropogenic environments like the city. Crows and raccoons, right? So yeah.
Yeah, but I really want to see what the hell a war god looks like when its public face is the raccoon.
Um there's a whole anarchist trash panda like theology thing, but that's anyway.
I
We'll
dig
set
it,
that to the side.
so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. Like you hear that a lot from people who are having, especially early in their relationship with a deity like the Morrigan, it has a crow identification. And, you know, I feel like that's tricky. Like, it's hard to ever say to somebody that thing you experienced was not religious or meaningful. because sometimes it's just about the feeling that you got when you saw something. But what I usually tell people is like, it helps to have a body of observation of that animal in that environment so you know what normal behavior is. Right? So like normal behavior, if a crow is hopping around, even if it looks like it's paying attention to you, they're curious animals. They know we produce yummy trash. They are playful animals. They like, toys and objects that humans leave around. They will play with those things. So, just because a crow is around and appears to be paying attention to you, it might just be like doing crow stuff. And like there is absolutely an ancient tradition of divining by looking at the behavior of animals, birds in particular, and crows in particular. Like there's a whole medieval Irish document about it called Prognostications by the Raven and the Wren. And it lists all these different kinds of ways that these birds might behave and what that could mean. But, if you read that sort of thing closely, they are clearly talking about people who have spent a lot of time observing with these animals and probably are dealing with a kept animal that is, a particular like consecrated divinatory companion animal. So yeah, I think it's about context and actually spending some time observing those animals in their particular environment so that you know what unusual behavior is. That's one part of it. The other part of it is if you ritualize it, like there's a ritual way of doing augury where like, you do a little ritual practice, and then the idea is the next thing you see when you emerge from the meditation or the ritual practice is the omen that you're taking. And so if you have ritualized it in that way, for sure, take whatever crow you see and read it as an omen. But if it's, you just see one when you're going through your day, it sort of needs to be doing something special. I'm sorry, you said quick fire and I am expounding at length.
No, that was good. Because you cover on a lot there that we kind of, I think all of us end up sort of addressing and readdressing in our communities as sort of new people come through or people have lapses in their practice and then return and it's kind of starting afresh. Those kinds of things come up a lot.
Yeah.
The only other one that I sort of had is kind of a mishmash sort of how do you address the whole kind of sexy, dark, edgy goddess image?
Yes. This is like one of the really persistent ones that yeah. So the Morrigan definitely has a couple of her stories in the Irish literature that pertain to sex. And so people will sometimes read that as this idea that she is a sex goddess.
Hello everyone, this is the editor checking in to let you know that there was a bit of an issue with some of the audio, and we did end up losing a little bit of a section. However, there's still some more good stuff to go. Please stick around. Sorry for the issues. Bye now.
Dances.
Damn, I missed all the dancing too. That's
You
bullshit.
did. You missed the dancers and the singers and the comedians. It was quite the interlude.
There was even a clown.
There was.
I'm going to check in with Emily real quick, and I'm going to mute myself in the meantime. I'll be right back. Is this fucking thing actually recording? Yes, it is. Okay, good. All right, I'll be right back.
All right, no worries.
And I imagine we'll be wrapping before too long, right? It's like almost 5 here.
Yeah, I was going to say we're coming up to 2 hours anyways. I was sort of thinking of having that be the last or, second to last question or something. And then Zoom fell apart. Since we're recording now, I don't know if you want to revisit
Pick up where I left off.
dark, edgy, sexy goddess the Morrigan.
Yes, right. Well, I mean, I feel like it's an easy way to interpret her because, war goddess, that's like super metal or whatever.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of, vignettes in her myths that deal with sex, but like the thing that I think is important to notice is that when her sexuality comes up in the myths, it's not just like about being sexy. It's not about pleasing someone. It's not about being appealing. It's not about sexuality on display. It's sex has a function. It's being instrumentalized in a powerful way, and often in a way that is going to challenge someone. So, in one of the stories where her sexuality comes up, she is engaging in basically an annual marital tryst with her husband, the Dagda, that is associated with the granting of luck in battle. So it's for a purpose, and it is part of a marriage ritual. Another instance where her sexuality is on display is where she, sort of offers herself to Cuchulainn, and depending on how you read that story, it seems very likely that it's a test. She's testing him to see if he can be distracted from his purpose. Right.
So you mean that the Morrigan is not my potential big titty goth goddess?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So, and you can see the same sort of thing. Like if you look at Macha and Bibe, they both have sexuality that makes an appearance in their stories, but it's like, it's got something to do with either teaching a lesson or challenging power in some way. And so I think like they are very aware of sexuality as an exchange of power. And I just, whenever this thing comes up of like, oh, the Morrigan is my dominatrix and she comes to me in my dreams, it's like, I really want people to ask themselves why that is the way of relating to her.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that their go-to? And it really comes down to a cultural thing of like, it's misogyny, basically. It's like, she's only powerful to me or interesting to me if she's fuckable. And so I just want to challenge that whenever I see it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I think a really good question. And I appreciate that sort of throughout all of this and the different topics and questions we've gone through, the kind of through line of thinking about how things relate, sort of how people are relating to the different aspects of Unmorrigan, thinking about how you're relating the different sort of jobs and tasks and things that you engage in your life, thinking about how you're relating to the deities and the spirits and each other and the wider community.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. We've been going for around about 2 hours, and before the internet goes again in Michigan, thank you very much for coming on. It's been really fun.
Likewise, I have really had a blast talking with you all. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. And maybe we could have you again on again sometime. Maybe after the next book comes out.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that.
Cool.
That would be fantastic.
So
go for it, Snow.
okay. So where can people find your stuff?
So my website is bansheearts.com, and you can kind of find everything from there. I have, like a Facebook page and Instagram, and my tattoo portfolio is also on Instagram. I have a Patreon, but it's all linked from my website.
and I would recommend people do go check it out. There's lots of cool stuff up there, lots of amazing artwork.
Thanks. Thank you.
So yeah. Cabra isn't here. Cabra stuff can be found at Steel City Witch on everything Cabra is on. Cabra is on YouTube and a whole bunch of things. Go check that out. Emily.
streakingfate.wordpress.com. I very occasionally update my blog. Morpheus, it has been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Sarah, if you have a list of pluggables, go ahead.
All right. So you can find my work at sarenth.wordpress.com. You can find me on Twitter at Sarenth. You can find me on Mastodon with the same username at Sarenth. You can find my work. If you wish to support me, you can go to patreon.com/Sarenth Odinson. You can ask me to do prayers or topic writing for you, or you can sign up for a monthly reading. You can also find me on Three Pagans on Tap, which I co-host with Malik Odinson. And of course, you can also find this show on Patreon. If you wish to suggest people for the show, if you wish to submit audio clips, anchor.fm allows you to do that. You can support us through the Patreon, as I mentioned. And we will have this episode drop as soon as we are able to mix it down. Again, as always, thank you to Jason for doing the back end work and for letting us do the front end work here. And Snow, plug your pluggables.
Linktree/Snow the Goth is where you can find everything that I do and I'm on. Because Sarenth didn't say it, on Patreon, patreon.com/AroundGrandfatherFire.
Oh,
We
I
also
didn't?
have a Discord server. The Discord server is not Patreon locked. You don't have to be a Patreon patron to join our Discord server. We have all kinds of people on the Discord server, from Christian witches and Christo-pagans through to atheist pagans and polytheists and mystics and all kinds of people. It's really cool. Come join us. You can submit questions for our guests, like the wonderful Morpheus here.
So this has been a fabulous episode, and I'm looking forward to folks listening to it. And I want to thank you, Morpheus, for joining us, and looking forward to having you on again.
My pleasure. Thank
And
you.
I want to thank everybody. Oh, absolutely. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time around the fire.